can the digital Iron Curtain be swept aside? Now, personally, I don't know the answer to this question, but we have 4 panelists who might be able to help us with that today. Starting with Maria Makiva, editor-in-chief of Ost-West TV in Berlin, the only Russian-language TV channel in Germany specializing in independent European news in Russian. A hand for Maria, please. At the end, please. Thank you. Leonid Volkov, Chief of Staff and Political Director for the team of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, now jailed, of course. He's also founder of the Internet Protection Society, Russia's leading digital rights NGO. We would also like to welcome Lutz Gullner, the head of Division for Strategic Communications and Information Analysis in the European External Action Service. Welcome. And joining us on the line from Taipei is Taiwan's digital minister and renowned hacktivist Audrey Tang. Hello. Thank you all for being here. And to you, our dear audience, we will also have a chance to ask them questions as well, whether you're following us online or you're joining us here in the hall, so do take advantage. But first, my questions, of course. And I would like to start with one for all of you. So the digital Iron Curtain sounds like an abstract concept to many people, but can you tell us how it has affected you concretely or your work? Starting with Maria, please.
Yeah, how it's affected me. It affected people in Russia, first of all. I'm talking about Iron Curtain between Russia and the other world. And I also remember like 3 years ago in this exact chamber, we've seen the video of Leonid Volkov, who should be here personally, physically, but he wasn't because he was in jail. He took 20 days, remind me, yeah, something like this, in jail for protests, but we received his video. So technologically it was possible, but it didn't help not to go to prison for some protests, for example. And I understand now why Putin needs this new Iron Curtain, but what I do not understand why the West needs it. Because what we see, it's the building of Iron Curtain from both sides. Like the colleague before here on plenary session from Myanmar, she told about Google documents they exchanged to provide independent information. And we couldn't do it. Our colleagues in Russia couldn't do it because we couldn't use Google documents anymore. And whom does it help, should I ask? And there are many, many examples like this. For example, Visa and MasterCard, they left Russia. So it's absolutely destroyed independent journalistic business. For Medusa, for example, this is the main example of independent journalism in Russian language from abroad, very successful. And their business model was very successful. Now it's absolutely destroyed by that. So there are many examples like this, and probably we're not talking about shipping tomorrow at this moment, but we're shipping the day after tomorrow. Who are you going to talk to? I mean, the West. Who will be left in Russia, be very sympathetic to the West after that? And yeah, people feel like they just forgotten and neglected. And sociologically speaking, 75% of people oriented to the West in Russia, they affected by sanctions and by, it's like, I don't know how it's called, it's a wave of Western company just leaving Russia out of the sanctions just because they felt they need to leave. And sometimes it helped build the new Iron Curtain, wall. And we couldn't, I mean, how we provide independent information to people left in Russia, how we provide that for them, this is a real problem. In Soviet times, in the end of Soviet times, the main strategy of the West was advertise of Western way of life, like Western values and everything. How are you going to advertise this? This is my question, yeah.
Now, you've managed to touch on many aspects there, but I feel like the natural next person to answer this question is Leonid, since we're already talking about Russia. Please.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy that now I'm talking to this forum directly, so not from jail. That's a much better experience, despite my train was late this morning. And this is no coincidence that Vladimir Putin and Kremlin shut down all independent media in Russia on the first day of the war. They clearly understand that a media landscape is a part of the warfare, and it is also our understanding. This war, the war of Russia against Ukraine, is being fought on three fronts. There is a military one, the very obvious, where Ukrainian armed forces resist aggression, but there is also the economic front, of course, where sanctions are being applied to make it harder for Putin actually to finance the war. And then there is an informational front, where we, like Maria, Medusa, Dost, remaining independent media, or what remains of independent media, are trying to push our message through, to reach out through regular Russians, to the general audience, to tell them the truth, to counter the propaganda, to counter Russian disinformation, to talk to them. And that's very important, because so much depends actually on the attitude of the Russian society. This actually could stop the war. 1914, on all sides on the front, they were go fight, kill them all, protect the fatherland. 1918, you don't belong there, you go home, this is not your war. It was both in Russia and in Germany and in France, and the war came to the end. So, army is part of society. Morale of the army depends very much on the attitude of the society. So, working with what people think about the war and so on is very important. We now have, for instance, the monthly audience of approximately 20 million monthly active users in Russia. That's a lot. But to stay in touch with them, we have to rely on a very narrow channel of communication, like on YouTube. We are hostages of the Western tech platforms and their policies. And we have had quite unpleasant experience in the past. For instance, this very well-known case when in September 2021, on the eve of the parliamentary election in Russia, Google and Apple caved to the unlawful censorship requests by Russian authorities and took away our voting app, which kind of distributed independent voting endorsements for independent candidates in the upcoming election. It has been removed because, well, Kremlin threatened to them, blackmailed them, put pressure on them, and they caved. So now we see that many things are also happening in this regard. For instance, yeah, as Maria already mentioned, many companies leaving Russia, leaving Russians without access to independent information. There are also other examples, for instance, Cloudflare, the DDoS protection service, a huge web hoster, told we will not only leave Russia, we will reinforce, we will allocate more server capacities for Russia, for provide Russians with uncensored internet access. But these are very few examples. Most of the independent media in Russia are now blocked. Not most, 99% of them. You could only access them through VPNs. Okay, we invested a lot in educating Russians about VPNs, and the install base has grown a lot. But for a decent VPN service, you have to pay. And you can't do it because Visa and MasterCard are not working in the country anymore. So this, access to information, resisting digital Iron Curtain, requests a lot of work from both sides, not only from the civil society and from those who want to break through the digital Iron Curtain, but also from the Western governments, and first of all, from the tech companies.
Now, I want to grab onto a word that you mentioned there, and it's participation. And I would like to go to Audrey Tang, who can tell us something about this. And also, again, the original question of how you have been affected by the digital Iron Curtain.
Yeah, for me, the digital Iron Curtain is not something new. It shaped my career as around a century. I was working with Freenet and later on with Tor and with many peer-to-peer decentralized communication technologies around the time that the Golden Shield program gets designed and then later implemented. So for the past 20 years or so, I've witnessed that the civic infrastructure that we have built around those hacktivist protest-oriented technologies do turn into possible civic spaces and infrastructures, even in entirely off-the-grid situations. For example, the end-to-end encryption that our community built toward Bluetooth-based conversations, fire chat, and so on, turned into many verse and many other off-the-grid communication channels that enabled secure, free-from surveillance communications, even in off-the-grid situations. So I would say that a lot of the on-the-street, what we call situational applications, that people built when we, for example, occupied peacefully our parliament in 2014 March for 3 weeks, that enabled 500,000 people to have a deliberative conversations on the street, translate directly into, from the media competence sort of use in democratic countries into the sort of civic resistance infrastructure use in more off-the-grid authoritarian situations because it's open sourced and shared with the world.
We're really starting to see the connection here between a free internet and democratic participation. So I'd like your perspective now, Lutz, on that first question that we asked. How has it affected your work in particular?
I mean, we have for a very long time have praised, and rightly so, the opportunities that the net and the connection and the digital developments kind of offer us. And I think we have discussed it also in the past 1 or 2 days here. But now we have started to realize that there are also risks, that we also need to look at what you can do on the bad side, so to say, that you can manipulate. And I think this is a very, very important word in all this. So this can be in the form of creating barriers, in creating controls. That is, of course, for domestic use, and I think we heard already some of these examples. But I also want to look at a very specific phenomenon that we have discussed also yesterday very shortly, and that is this issue of disinformation, of using this net as a strategic tool, as a strategic weapon, so to say. And I actually don't want to use the word disinformation, because disinformation implies that there is good and bad information, that there is right and wrong, and true and false, and we know that there are many gray areas in between. I think the real thing we need to worry about is information manipulation. What is the difference? The difference is that there are states or structures that actually use specific strategies to develop very clear instruments, very clear tactics, also to deploy the information environment at large for their own strategic tools. That can be a state, that can be a non-state actor as well, and I think we should be much more kind of aware of that, in the sense of seeing also that this is a whole ecosystem that is mobilized, from media, state media, to websites, to social media. It all belongs together. And that's the most important point, is that all this is very asymmetric, because we have this discussion, what are the ones doing, what are we doing, how do we respond? Very often, we don't even have the right mindset to respond to this. We come with this idea of informing, of setting narratives, of engaging, while very often these other actors, and in particular the Russian state apparatus, is there to mislead, is there to influence, is there to manipulate. And I think this we need to understand much better, and that is, of course, affecting my work tremendously in everything that we're doing.
And with what mindset are we supposed to come?
With a more holistic mindset, I think. This is not just about the one side sets a narrative or a false information, and we need to respond with better information. I think on one panel yesterday, somebody said, I don't know who it was, that she was sick and tired of fact-checking. I wouldn't be tired of fact-checking. It's still important, but it's not the only response. We need to think much broader. We need to look at what we can do on the upstream, so to deter these actors from deploying these tactics, these approaches, and we need to look at the downstream, so how can we sharpen, how can we improve also our own resilience. And I think these things always need to be done as one package. You know, we cannot just look at, oh, let's regulate the social media platforms, then we have solved the issue. No, it might be an important element, but it's only one of the building blocks. Let's do quality journalism. Yes, it's an important element, but it's only one element. And all this, you need to think together. And that's very challenging for politics and policy, I think.
Audrey Tang, you've done a lot of work into ensuring a democratic internet in Taiwan. Do you agree with Mr. Lutzkellner's views?
Certainly. I think the importance of fact-checking ecosystem is very similar to contact tracing in fighting of a pandemic. So in fighting of infodemic or information manipulation, of course, we cannot rely on contact tracing alone, that is to say proper attribution and so on, but also to first build a good habit of what we call media competence here in Taiwan instead of just media literacy in our basic and lifelong education. So when middle schoolers can fact-check the 3 presidential candidates as they're having real-time debates, when their fact checks appear on the screen, the live TV for everyone, it's not just about fact-checking as a thing that the students learn, but rather it's about something actively civic that they contribute to the society. And then the students very quickly learn that the same civic tech communities, such as the CoFacts channel, instead of the professional journalists doing all the fact-checking, people can join in those local meetups, like the Wikipedia meetups that edit certain parts of Wikipedia, except, of course, in Taiwan, they go together and check particular aspects of the disinformation landscape so that people can simply report, just like reporting spam, what's the trending disinformation there is, and if it's information manipulation, people crowdsource their intelligence. Of course, at the end of the day, it is still vetted by someone in an international fact-checking network to add to the notice and public notice regime. But before that, it is a collective learning tool, so that instead of taking anything down, just like we don't do lockdown here in Taiwan vis-a-vis the pandemic, we don't do takedowns, because for the administration to take down something is to take away, to decimate the agency of the people to learn together, to do this kind of developing the mental antibodies to the virus of the mind, if it will. So I think this mandatory labeling, the participation of all the large platforms, the establishment of a local civic spaces that adhere to those norms before the international counterparts do, all that strengthens the negotiation power of our democracy vis-a-vis the global platforms when it comes to disinformation antibodies development.
Now, these are some very good macro level recommendations, but I was wondering, Maria, since you had already mentioned it earlier, you said that one of the hardest parts about the existence of the digital Iron Curtain for you as a journalist, of course, is getting information to audiences. What has that experience been like for you?
Nowadays, to receive an information from Russia is very, very difficult because you have to find brave people who stay there, want to report you back. And the second thing is that you have to find a way to pay them. And this is also a question of technology, of Iron Digital Curtain. And this all left for us, for journalists. Maria Ressa yesterday told that we do not, journalists do not embrace technology enough. But nobody told us we should be not just humanitarians who write good or present it good, we should be like technology geniuses. Come on, we would need some help here in this field. And this is really, now it's a very, very challenging moment, how to reach the audience, how to reach the sources of information there. And look, for me, journalism is not only information, double-checking, and this is all good. But I'm working for television. That means what? Entertainment. People want to watch something like nice sometimes. And then they will watch your news probably a little bit, which is very good. And this is how Russian state propaganda is working. They're very good entertainers. And then another example. For example, company Netflix left Russia completely. Okay, people paid for Netflix, West-oriented people who want to pay for the production, not just go to pirates and watch it. Okay, they feel bad. And what if, just imagine, what if Netflix stayed and then start to show, for example, documentaries on Ukraine war? Or just news from independent sources, which could be more helpful. But what we see now, Netflix available abroad, we're abroad, I mean in Germany, and I turned on Netflix last week, what I see, that they just purchased a movie of Sergei Yastrovzhensky. Leonid, you know him. This is an ex-advisor of Putin, who became a hunter in Africa and a producer of movie of wild nature. So he produced a very good movie. He's a rich man. And he sold it on Netflix. And you can see it on Netflix now. And nobody explained the audience who Yastrovzhensky is.
Now, Leonid, you had already mentioned the big tech platforms earlier. Maria has just mentioned Netflix now and how that Netflix has left. I want to ask you, we've seen bans of Instagram and Facebook back in March. What is the responsibility of tech platforms here? Do they have a responsibility to remain accessible to their users, even in the face of such bans?
Yes, they do. Well, first of all, because if it's in their best business interests to stay in the country, to stay connected with their users, to protect their audience from abuse, also from governmental abuse. I would say the first step that we asked them to do for many years, they are now ready to do, which is not to put legal compliance ahead of human rights. This has been their approach for many years. We have like your local legal requirements in this country and that country and that country. We just follow them and that's it. I mean, these are local legal requirements. Now, the appetites of the dictators used to grow, not only Putin's, but also like all kinds of them. And finally, after a lot of debate and after a lot of discussion, big tech companies started to learn that, well, if they go to certain depths in just complying with legal requirements, they will just put their users at risk. Like when governments in a country like Russia started to ask for like secret keys to be able to open encrypted chats and so on, well, companies realized they have to draw a line somewhere. Like to draw a line along legal compliance was just too easy, too cheap. This is local law, this is local regulation, we just comply. Which is not local regulation, we don't comply. To draw a line, this line was very visible, it was very easy to follow. To draw the line around like human rights, like what does protect users' human rights, what does correspond to users' interest and what does not, is much more challenging. It requires a lot of research and investment and a lot of understanding of local, like political and media landscape. And many mistakes have been made. Like the famous story about Myanmar when like Facebook moderators didn't find anything bad about like the hate speech against Rohingya people and so on. Like it happened in Russia too. The things that I've already mentioned with them like deleting independent voting application or like banning content, just taking down content based on censorship requests by government bodies. Now, well, it looks like now they are ready to anticipate it. That in countries like Russia, like Iran, like China, you can't just follow what the government is saying. You don't have to presume that the government is an actor acting in good faith. You have to double check, you have to reach out to like local communities, to local digital rights NGOs and so on. But now, I believe it's time to make one step forward, which is to resist. Like just one simple example, if Google implements the protocol called ECH, Encrypted Client Hello, it makes obsolete the whole system of censorship which Russia has developed so far. I didn't know about Chinese system of internet censorship, but for Russian, it's just true. They just switch it on. They just need to push one button, and everything that Russian infamous censorship body, Roskomnadzor, did since 2011, and they invested billions, and they stole billions also over this, in this enormous system of content filtering and blacklisting, it stops working. Like, just stops working. They will not be able to overcome. Well, I don't get an answer from them. Why is it done? Why they actually didn't do it? Or another example, like Instagram, as you mentioned, has been blacklisted in Russia in the first days of the war. Instagram has been like the second largest media platform after YouTube. Instagram didn't resist. They could, and this is well known. It's well described and well documented how Russian censorship model actually works. And while it's hardly possible to protect a website from being blacklisted, the only way to access a blacklisted website would be via Tor browser or via VPN, or like tools like Siphon. For an application to protect itself from those blacklists, that's no rocket science. Telegram did it in 2018. Within the application, you have like many tools. You could like use different protocols, rotate IP addresses of your servers. It requires a bit of investment, a bit of technical competence, and a lot of knowledge of the country you're operating in. And then your users are protected and your users can communicate. But we see this lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. For Instagram, it was easier to say, okay, our user base in Russia is now down from 60 million daily users down to 17, which is like lost 43 million users, like a country like France. And why? If they just would think a little bit about what they could do, they could be able to find a way. And for the media landscape, for independent media, for activists, for like organizations like the Anti-Corruption Foundation or like independent broadcasters, this would be also a very good thing. But it also corresponds to their business interests and so on. Just a bit more competence is needed.
A bit more competence. At this stage, we'd like to take a question from Leonid Volkov in Germany. How can we differentiate between critical thinking if applied to contexts where doubts are used by the, in quotes, the outside to destabilize, and disinformation? Audrey, Tang, perhaps you could take that one.
I think anything that adds to the context that makes it easier for people to see that there is a source, that you can go back to the source, and so on, is adding to the discussion. And I think a lot can be said to the public spaces in the digital realm around how we interact. So, for example, in Taiwan, the Civic platforms, the equivalent of Reddit, is maintained by the open source community, is self-governed to a degree under the National Taiwan University, part of the academic network. And so people learned to navigate those additional contributions as critical thinking and so on with their own meta-level analysis tool to, for example, uncover coordinated unauthentic behavior and so on without waiting for the state capacity to do that. And once sufficient amount of young internet users and old through lifelong learning learn to spot those patterns, it beats the state organized counter-disinformation efforts because everyone can set up their own analysis, and it raises the awareness that there is actually information manipulation going on. So a recontextualizing service on a pro-social space, preferably operated by the civic media and civic technologists, I think that would be the best way to just see those disinformation manipulations as potentially also adding to the context.
Lutz, I see that you want to add something, but it's standing in the room and we have to ask it. Audrey Tan said something earlier about how bans and takedowns take away the agency of the users. Now, of course, the EU has blocked RT and Sputnik. Is that not equivalent to censorship within the EU as well?
Clearly no, and I come back to this, but I wanted to add something to what Audrey Tang has just said. We seem to have this dilemma. on how do we deal with this content? How do we classify it? When is it good? When is it bad? When do we need to act? And when don't we have to act? And I think we all agree here in this room that the big difficulty of this disinformation, if we want to use that term, is actually that it's not illegal. There's no law that forbids somebody to lie or to tell the untruth, you know? So how do we do this? I think there's a solution. The solution, I could do this academically, is the ABC model. The ABC model is we need to look at the actor, we need to look at the behavior and the content. So not only at the content, we also need to see which strategy is being deployed, which tactics are being used to amplify, and which actor is using this. And only then we have a much better idea how this is working. And I see Audrey Tang nodding, and we are in contact with many, many partners, including her department in terms of our international partners, to develop this approach, because that would get us out of this dilemma. Because you have the freedom of speech, even with the most absurd positions, but as long as it's genuine. The problem kicks in when there is artificial amplification, when it's not anymore a genuine voice, when there is manipulation of the identity, when there is manipulation of the reach. And I think this is what we need to focus on. So you have the freedom of speech, but you don't have the right to a megaphone. To your other question on the sanctions. We did not look at this from, there is an article that we didn't like, or there is a journalist who said something that we don't like, but we looked at the overall situation. The overall situation is that RT and Sputnik have been used and continue to be used as strategic instruments of the state. There are no media outlets in the sense how we would define it, with a publishing ethics, with clear ideas, how the editorial independence, how the editorial line is being done. And I very often, especially here in this forum, get the question, so what's the difference between Deutsche Welle and Russia Today? These are totally different organizations. You know?
I don't think I need to ask.
And of course, I'm preaching to the converted if I look at you, but I come back to this. So we have sanctioned not content that we did not like, that's why it's no censorship, but we stopped the Russian state apparatus from using strategic instruments to underpin, to support its strategic aims, in that case, the war against Ukraine. This is the logic, and of course, we are doing this on the basis of law. You can challenge that. That is happening at the moment, and I would always argue, let's please not kind of compare apples and pears, because these so-called outlets are no media in the classic sense, and we need to be very, very careful about this.
Can I add something to this?
Yes, please. And then we have time for one question. Okay. Maria.
I just heard a story just today in the morning from one German friend of mine, and his parents are from eastern part of Germany. Now they used VPN to watch Russia Today, because they suspect that something probably wrong, they want to receive some other information. And this is very difficult and very wide question, should somebody be banned or not? And I forgot to say it in the very beginning actually, that all means are good if it leads to the end of the war. If not, probably should avoid it, avoid some restrictions, what I want to tell. And now, the Europe is in the war. So all means are good to stop it.
Thank you very much. The gentleman who had a question, perhaps you can stand up, say your name and your question, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm Oliver, dealing with field in strategic communication, and I listened very carefully to this panel, and I have a question to Maria and Leonid, as we learned a little bit about the measures of the European Union to tackle disinformation, increasing fact-checking, and also first efforts to reaching out to people behind the digital curtain. Are you satisfied with these efforts, or should be the EU in their efforts and their campaigning more offensive?
If we can be brief, please. We're under a lot of pressure. Thank you.
Well, that's good that European Union is doing something. It's too little, too late, definitely. So, there are many practical steps that actually could be taken to increase accessibility of independent information for Russian users dramatically. We have already touched upon the VPNs, which are now a necessity for everyone in Russia, and there is a lot of demand for independent information, but Russians can't afford them, can't pay for them, not because they're expensive, they're not, but because they just don't have payment tools. Well, to revert Visa and MasterCard for own decision to leave Russian market would be great. It was a clear case of collateral damage because no Putinist was hurt by this decision, only Putin's opponents. But if it's not, okay, let's do it reversely. Like the regular VPN service costs like €3 a month, and the actual cost of the service is maybe 10% of that. The all others is like, you know, marketing and margin and whatever, and the infrastructure of collecting €3 a month from many users. Okay, so no problem. Spend this money on this side, like provide a high quality free service, like accessible and like blacklist resistant. So with some technology,
Right.
not just like a mainstream VPN, but with, you know, like a little bit of technical sophistication state. This, promote it, Russians will be thankful, and it will make a difference. It will be actually very important and will help a lot. Now, US is doing something like this. They have invested very much in Siphon and Lantern. Europe
Leonid?
is not doing anything like
I'm
this.
so sorry, we have to leave it there. Perhaps you can network with Maria Mikiva afterwards to hear her views. At this stage, I'd like to thank my panelists. Thank you very much for the insights, Maria Mikiva, Leonid Volkov, Lutz Kulner, and Audrey Tang. Thank you to all. I'd like to turn over the floor to my colleague, Javier Arguedas.